So let's get started. So this webinar series is called Challenges of Expanding Access to Health Products in Fight Against Neglected Tropical Diseases. And this webinar is organized by Japan Alliance on Global Neglected Tropical Disease, JAGntd, and sponsored by Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, JAGntd Fund. And my name is Kota Yoshioka, Assistant Professor at the Institute of Tropical Medicine, Nagasaki University. And it's my pleasure to have you all in today's session. And as you may know, that this webinar series is designed to discuss key access challenges in the field of NTDs. The previous session examined issues around fexinidazole, new treatment of human African trypanosomiasis. Now I will call my team members and let's see what they learned from the previous session. So first, my co-moderator, Isaac. Isaac, please introduce yourself and share one point that struck you during the previous session. Go ahead, Isaac.
Thank you very much, Yoshioka-san. I'm Isaac, the Access Director for the Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, and I'm co-moderating this session with Yoshioka-san. So in the first session, we spoke about access in general, a very conceptual view, and some of the solutions that can be used to, to address some of the access challenges. And in the second session, we spoke about a real example of a drug that was introduced, applying those concepts in real life. So for me, the take-home message from that was that it is actually possible to improve access, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of coordination involving multiple stakeholders. So the second session really illustrated, that in reality. Thank you.
Okay, great. Now let me call Taro. Taro, are you with us?
Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm a Master's of Public Health student, currently working for the JAGntd. Last session, I felt that the video portrayed the efforts put into the development of fexinidazole for African trypanosomiasis very well. I didn't know the patients had to suffer such a painful treatment before the new drug appeared. And I also learned about the importance of being able to properly diagnose and detect the case in the first place to deliver the drug to the right place. So last time it was from a developer's perspective, but this time it's from a country perspective. So I'm really looking forward for this session too. Thank you.
Thank you, Taro. And he will be supporting us for our Q&A session later. And this is my point, something similar. So I learned that the bad experience with the old treatment can affect access to new treatment, which means people remember how bad was the old treatment, and that experience leads to hesitancy to taking a new one. And it's not easy, maybe, to override such an existing and a very strong memory among people. So that's my point. And let's move on to today's topic, Pediatric Praziquantel. So this drug is expected to provide a practical solution to treat children infected with schistosomiasis. And just a few days ago, there was an announcement that its phase 3 trial was successfully completed. But the drug is not yet approved by regulatory authorities, and we want to see what we can do for better access even before its regulatory approval. Great. So let me invite one of today's 3 speakers, Dr. Peter Steinmann. Peter will talk about global access strategies for pediatric praziquantel on behalf of the Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium's access subteam. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to present the ADOPT program of the Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium. I have put together one introductory slide so that everybody is reminded what schistosomiasis is actually. It's a water-related parasitic disease which is endemic in more than 70 countries, but over 90% of the burden is actually found in sub-Saharan Africa. It also occurs in Latin America and a few places in Asia. Of note, in Japan, it has been eliminated many, many years ago already. Globally, about 200 million people are infected currently, and over 800 million people are at risk of infection. So it is quite a high number of people affected by this disease or threatened by this disease. And this includes 50 million preschool-age children, again, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa. The main drug for the control and treatment of schistosomiasis is praziquantel, but this drug in its current formulation is not very suitable for the treatment of preschool-age children. That's why I point out these 50 million children who are currently not having regular access to treatment. And this is exactly the reason why this consortium was constituted. This consortium set itself the goal to develop a new praziquantel formulation in an orally disintegrating tablet format, which is suitable for the treatment of very young children. So this you see on the picture, the small tablet compared to the current standard tablet. The small tablet should be easy to swallow, so smaller and dissolving when in contact with liquids. It can be taken with or without water. It's not as bitter as the commercial current formulation, and it's easier to adjust the dose because it comes in smaller tablets. The old big tablets can be broken in the middle, as you see, but then further adjustment is very cumbersome. Also, the formulation is stable in hot and humid conditions where schistosomiasis is usually found. This is a response to the large bitter standard tablets, which are often used off-label to treat small children who are found to be infected. So you had to crush these tablets and all the issues related to that mentioned above. What is now the history of this consortium? The Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium was founded almost 10 years ago in 2012 as an international not-for-profit public-private partnership for schistosomiasis control. It's supported by leading experts in tropical parasitic infectious diseases and has a vision to reduce the global disease burden of schistosomiasis by addressing the medical need of infected preschool-age children, including infants and toddlers. The mission of the consortium is to develop, then register, and to provide access to this pediatric praziquantel formulation for the preschool-age children. This means there is a development team which is taking care of the trials and the registration, and there is now an access team which is taking care of the technology transfer, the delivery options, the funding for implementation, and so on. This is how these two teams work together currently. So we have the phase 3 trial just completed, results just announced a couple of days ago, as mentioned before. And this will go on now to regulatory file submission and then hopefully a positive opinion. During this time already, the access team has constituted itself, prepared protocols, proposals, and obtained funding for the ADOPT program, which is granted since about a year. 2021 early, we had the start of the activities funded by GHIT and EDCTP jointly, as also the phase 3 trials before. The aim of this ADOPT program specifically now is to prepare the introduction of levopraziquantel into the schistosome endemic communities. And this is based on a multidisciplinary effort with the engagement of key partners and stakeholders. There is planned for a set of studies on the feasibility and effectiveness to ensure the acceptance of the new drug, and then also to transfer the manufacturing technology to Kenya, so that there is a producer, a manufacturer in sub-Saharan Africa, which will enable or facilitate access to the drug. And then last but not least, effort to mobilize resources to then support the scale up of the use of this new formulation. The ideas guiding the ADOPT program were first the goal to understand the perception of pediatric schistosomiasis and define the social mobilization strategies, and to identify the platforms and approaches how the drug can be brought to the children most effectively in different endemic countries. So we designed 2 parts. First, social mobilization and communication strategy development, which is to be tailored to national health system and contexts, and then an implementation process to select the most appropriate distribution platforms. And as mentioned, the identification of the funders and stakeholders, then to support routine implementation. The objectives are listed here. We set ourselves 5 objectives. One is to identify potential facilitators and barriers to the implementation of levopraziquantel and inform thereby the social mobilization, communication, and training strategy. Second, to assess existing and select the platforms for delivery. Third, to quantify drug and funding needs for the levopraziquantel implementation in routine control of schistosomiasis. 4, to document the safety of levopraziquantel administration under programmatic conditions. Of course, safety is being assessed in the trials, but here it's about the program routine conditions, which means also co-administration with other common pediatric health products. And then 5, to inform national and international policy change and guideline development so that schistosomiasis control in pediatric populations can be made more efficient. Here, the overview over the program as it is designed and approved by the funders. It's an implementation research program bringing together the stakeholders from pharmaceutical companies, academic institutions, non-government organizations, and governments from endemic countries. Then we have a preparatory phase, pre-licensure, and then a rollout phase, post-licensure of the drug, which sees then actually the delivery of the drug to first small numbers of children and in an escalating way to larger numbers of children. For the moment, we are in this pre-licensure phase, of course, and there we count with 5 years for the overall program, but 3 years for the first part for this pre-licensure phase, and then the 2 years post-licensure. In terms of countries, currently the ADOPT program covers 3 countries, Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire, where also the trials have happened, and Uganda, which has joined beginning of this year. At the end of this 5-year process, we should have recommendations to support the introduction into routine practice in community settings and a toolkit to guide implementation. And this toolkit will be generic enough so that also other countries can profit from that experience and can identify quite easily the key points they have to address to facilitate the introduction of the pediatric praziquantel. Here, just 3 selected challenges and barriers we have already identified before even advancing to the implementation stage. First is a very practical question, how to get the weight-based dosing and administration to small children operational in field settings. This is easily done in a clinical setting, but in a field setting where NTD control happens in campaigns, this is a rather large challenge. Then, of course, the long-term funding for routine implementation is a big challenge. We have now stable and good funding for the ADOPT program, but then once the product goes into routine control program distribution, we need to work hard now to secure that funding. And linked to that is the question about drug needs and demand forecast, so that also manufacturers have visibility how many drugs they need to produce, which is of course linked to the demand in terms of how many children need to be treated, but also how quickly countries adopt this new drug and introduce it into their practices. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. Here listed all the partners in the consortium, and I thank you very much for your interest and attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. It was very clear, and I think your 3 challenges that you mentioned are very important, and more importantly, these are only selection. Thank you. So now let's focus on Tanzania. Tanzania is not directly targeted by the Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium's project, but this country started its own preparation with indirect support from the government of Japan. And our next speaker is Dr. Khadija Yahya-Malima from Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences. She will talk about how Tanzania is creating a policy environment to introduce new health technologies. So over to you, Khadija.
Thank you very much. First, I would like, before I show what I have to present, I would like to acknowledge or maybe be thankful for the consortia that is taking this important step in trying to ease the burden of this disease in our children. So thank you very much. And it was interesting to hear what you have to say. And I know Tanzania has not been part of the consortia, but we have been doing some work. Maybe I should start by saying, I'm going to walk through you with the Tanzania's preparedness for new technologies using the ADP policy model. And I would like that this is a model we're going to use, but we're going to address schistosomiasis, and we know we do have a problem. My colleague will talk about this, but I'm going to discuss at the policy level. So I have started this work with the Tanzania Commission for Science and Technology, COSTECH, and I would like to acknowledge that this is a presentation on their behalf. I'm now working at Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences, which is not different from, they are related. Muhimbili is a research and higher learning institution, and will bring in evidence which would tell COSTECH to suggest or advise the government on what policies to take, including the adoption of new technologies. So we're going to use the Praziquantel for children as a model to influence other technologies. I have to start with the demographic profile of Tanzania. As we speak right now, we have a pyramid-based profile, which means we have quite a number of children who are going to be the main workforce in the next 10 years. We have a population of around 61 million, but our density per square kilometer is about 65 persons. So when we have uncontrolled NTDs in the younger group, it means we're going to increase the burden of NCDs in the next decade when this group becomes the predominant workforce of Tanzania. With our work with ADP, I have to quote the Director of Global Health Policy Division, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Japan, who said that no single country, sector, or organization can solve this problem. Let's work together so that patients can access innovative health products as soon as possible. Everyone is part of the solution. So thank you, the consortia, for the work you're doing, since it's actually meaning that we all have to work together. Now, we had applied the ADP policy model simply because it was using capacity strengthening across the value chain of access and delivery. The ADP model had started at COSTECH around 2015 to be precise, and we were focusing on integrated public health innovation and industrial policies, disease control programs and drug regulatory frameworks, financing for procurement and innovation, procurement and supply chain management. And we had about 5 outputs. And it was a program which was led by UNDP as a joint task with Tanzania Commission for Science and Technology, the National Institute for Medical Research, Tanzania Medical and Drugs Authority, the Medical Services Department, Ministry of Health, and the other. But these are very important organizations that need to work together in order to facilitate the adoption of new technologies. And in this case, we're now talking about pediatric praziquantel. So when we looked into the policy, we found some incoherences, and I have to say, by the end of the project or the partnership, we had achieved maybe more than 50% of the policy. We created an awareness that we have incoherent policies, and these are being worked as we go on along. And regarding implementation science, we were also very successful that about more than 50%, which was achieved, but this was mainly in training, and NIMRI took largely this responsibility. We also had safety monitoring and pharmacovigilance. Again, this was more than 50% achieved because we trained more than 300 health workers to be able to diagnose the adverse drug reactions. And there are 2 red pieces that I will talk last, but I also wanted to talk about the procurement supply chain, which was more than 50% achieved, and this was solely by MSD, who is the responsible for distribution of drugs and health technologies in the country, and this was also facilitated by PAR. There are 2 major areas which we did not do very well, and that was less than 50% achieved. The strategic information and evidence, I have to say this part is still a challenge, and we're still going on with it. And then this other part, which is also related, that evidence-based resource allocation was less than 50% achieved, and I will tell you why. So with those achievements I have mentioned, this is the concise information about it. First, we had managed to have to develop an informal intersectoral forum for addressing critical issues relating to domestic research and development, pharmaceutical production and regulatory capacities, including inputs from the Ministry of Finance and Planning Commission. So now we do have a Ministry of Finance and Planning, not Commission as we speak. And we had these two studies which informed the decision-making around creating an enabling policy and legal framework, which is conducive to enhance access to essential medicines, participatory and enhanced regulatory control, harmonization and coordination of procurement, promoting domestic production of pharmaceuticals. And this is where Costa came in with the public-private linkages, and we had worked with the Association of Pharmaceutical Industries. Regarding the National Agenda for Health Systems Research, we had some developments and mentoring of national researchers to lead implementation research. Like I said before, this was also more than 50% achieved through research, through training. But I think now this is where the higher learning institutions need to come in, because the knowledge has to cascade up to the lower level so that we're all in the same frame of thinking. The fourth achievement was we had a strengthened capacity. I've mentioned that about 300 health workers from facilities across the districts on safety monitoring and response system for adverse drug reactions. We also had to strengthen the capacity of the core group of national experts using the health technology assessment to evaluate the cost effectiveness of national essential medicine list. And basically that defines the benefits package under the National Health Insurance Scheme, which it doesn't cover so much of the population. It's cost us about $92 million each year. We had an improved efficiency and reliability of the supply chain of the NTD medicines, like I've mentioned before, but we now have about 49 million people who are at risk of NTDs. We had improved efficiency, but I think in the long term, we need to be thinking further. So I have mentioned that again and again, that we're using this model to gauge our preparedness in adopting and adapting new health technologies. What is important here is that we're going to use this model. We have Tanzania. In this circle, I'm showing you the Tanzania National Safety and Therapeutic Committee. Now, this is a committee, it doesn't appear anywhere formally. I think it's important that we're now thinking maybe this is what should be the Health Technology Assessment Committee, but with it, there are 4 pillars that have to be worked together or have to be linked together. The public health and innovation industrial policies, the policies have to be in place. The disease control program and regulatory framework, we know that here we do not have a problem because Tanzania has one of the strongest medical and devices authority. But financing is still a problem. We have Ministry of Finance and Planning, and we're now thinking maybe we should also include the National Health Insurance Fund, even though it is overwhelmed, but I think it has an important say when it comes to new technologies. Costs are involved and feasibility would also involve the National Health Insurance Fund. Regarding the procurement and supply chain management, we had achieved this because it could be done, but I think now we also have acquired the Keiko pharmaceutical industry, and I think this is where an opportunity for us to have technology transfer, since now we can also manufacture some of these proven drugs that have been shown to work, like the Pediatric Praziquantel. Regarding the Tanzania National Safety and Therapeutic Committee, it needs to be visible. It is related to the ministry. Maybe we're thinking of it should be the HTA committee, but then where would it be placed? Because it needs to be independent and has with a certain degree of autonomy to make decisions that will be suitable for the overall goal of the Tanzanian population.
Excuse me, Khadija, could you wrap up your presentation?
Okay, access challenges for introducing. We do lack comprehensive governance platforms for decision making when it comes to new health technologies. We have unresolved incoherent platforms of policies which need to be streamlined, and we lack specific research and ethical guidelines and stable funding for vulnerable populations, and in this case, children. I wouldn't go anywhere without that. And now challenged evidence-based decision culture. Now cultural change is also very important because remember the 2 areas that we have not done very well. But the government of Tanzania is committed to work with global partners in ensuring that access and delivery of drugs for neglected tropical diseases of importance are available. There's a need to formalize this common platform for responsibilities, and one of them is facilitating the ratification of national laws to allow use of TRIPS flexibilities for ensuring public health interventions, provision of evidence-based technical advice and decision-making, a kind of knowledge synthesis platform, and ensuring sustainable funding and ensuring involvement of key players in the health ecosystem for complementary efforts and common vision and mission when it all comes to NTDs. Thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you, Khadija, for your presentation. Could you, that's fine, thank you. So let me call our final speaker. The next speaker is Dr. Paul Kazyoba from the National Institute for medical research in Tanzania. He will explain specific challenges to introduce pediatric praziquantel in Tanzania.
Thank you, Taro. Nish, can I have my slides, please? Yeah, perfect. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Professor Yoshi and the team. My talk is very brief. I'll be talking on the challenges to introduce pediatric praziquantel in Tanzania, and this is part of the Access and Delivery Partnership projects, which one of them is focusing on the introduction of pediatric praziquantel in the country. Next. Yeah, a bit of background before I dive into the challenges. Tanzania, like many other countries, we are also endemic to schisto. Basically, according to the NTDs or Neglected Tropical Disease Control Program, over 50% of the population is at risk of contracting schistosomiasis. And the evidence from our various research activities, and the one we just concluded recently, we found the prevalence to be to range from 4 to 50, or slightly above 50%. And this depended on the it varied according to the geography, with the regions close to water bodies, especially the big lakes, Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Nyasa, and some inland lakes like Rukwa, being more affected by the disease. Again, we also looked at the prevalence of schisto in children aged 5 years and below from 4 regions. We took 3 regions which are neighboring, or they are very close to the lake. 3 from Lake Victoria, and 1 from Lake Nyasa. And what we found again confirmed the data that we had before, that prevalence of schisto among under 5 now ranged from 4% to 54.9%, and this 54 was in one of the districts, which is an island within the Lake Victoria. Next. So it is important I provide a bit of information on what is STEPS, or strengthening capacity for delivery and uptake of pediatric praziquantel formulation schistosomiasis in Tanzania, or is abbreviated as STEPS project. This is part of the Access and Delivery Partnership program, and we aim to strengthen the capacity of the health system to introduce and deliver pediatric praziquantel to the targeted population, and in this case, the children under the age of 5 years. We also want to raise awareness on the burden of schistosoma infection among under 5 years children, and the potential availability of pediatric praziquantel formulation in the next 24 months. But now I think the time might be slightly shorter than what we expected. We also wanted to identify and address implementation barriers which may inhibit timely adoption, delivery, and the uptake of pediatric praziquantel in the country. These are the main objectives of the STEPS project. Next. So what has been our pathway towards achieving the goals? We thought it's important for us as implementation scientists to identify and address institutional and systemic challenges, which directly or indirectly affect timely introduction, delivery, and uptake of pediatric praziquantel. This is very important. And then we also wanted to focus on the community-centered challenges, which may affect the delivery of pediatric praziquantel to the community. And then we also wanted to see if we can establish the magnitude, especially of the infection, especially in the regions where data is missing. So these are the three main pathways to achieve the goal. Next. Well, in terms of institutional and systemic challenges, we were actually guided by the Access and Delivery Partnership value chain for introduction of a new or an improved health technology. So we wanted to see through the chain, do we have the institutions are responsible for each of the platforms, and then see whether there exists some challenges for each institution to introduce a new drug such as pediatric praziquantel. So we held what we call institutional workshop, capacity sort of review workshop. We invited the Tanzania Medicines and Drug Medical Devices Authority, the Medical Stores Department, and everyone who is responsible for the introduction of the new technology. When you look at the value chain, each segment formed a group supported by researchers from different institutions and the programs, the neglected tropical disease control program, as well as the participants or technical people from the president's office. So what were the key issues which were identified through the process? Number one, there was a long discussion on the inclusion of pediatric praziquantel in the National Essential Medicine List of Tanzania, or NEMLIT. And number two, there was an issue to decide on an effective delivery model for the new drug, which is focusing on under 5 children. And then there was an issue on the information, the pricing, because we don't know yet how much a tablet will cost, and that will actually inform quantification process. As a country, we need to know that. And then there was an issue on the budgetary challenges as pediatric praziquantel formulation is likely to be accessed through procurement. These are earlier details which we have been living with before probably hearing any new development on the funding. Next. So what have we done so far to address the challenges? Well, we held a high level engagement meeting to address both institutional and systemic challenges. And we focused mainly on 2 issues, because we didn't find any challenge with the regulatory framework, as Dr. Yahya-Malima said earlier on, because for them, once the dossier and the details are available, there is no problem for Tanzania to register pediatric praziquantel. After all, it would have already been approved by the WHO. So that challenge was completely removed in the list. So there are 2 main challenges which we tabled before the higher level engagement meeting. And this meeting was chaired by the chief medical officer. In other countries, they refer this post to as the director of health services. In attendance, we had the director of health, social welfare and nutrition services from the president's office. We had the program managers for RCH, reproductive and child health, program manager for neglected tropical disease control program. We had coordinator of NTD from the president's office as well, and program officers, director for policy and planning, director of preventive services, etc., and the research scientists, key research scientists and leaders from institution who we thought will provide some useful inputs. So issue number 1 was the inclusion of pediatric praziquantel in the National Essential Medicine List. And the issue number 2 was to discuss on the delivery model for pediatric praziquantel. So when it comes to issue number 1, we had a discussion. Unfortunately, the director for pharmaceutical services, or the chief pharmacist, informed the high level meeting that we will not need to introduce pediatric praziquantel in the National Essential Medicine list of Tanzania, simply because its parent formulation, which is the 600 milligram praziquantel, is already in the list. So what is needed really is to just present a case before the National Safety and Therapeutic Committee on the availability of this drug, and that it's actually derived from the existing medicine, which is the praziquantel. So that really addressed this big issue, and we looked at it as an issue or a challenge because when you look at the pattern, the meeting patterns for the National Safety and Therapeutic Committee, they meet twice in a year. Ideally, they're supposed to be meeting quarterly, but they meet twice a year. So we thought that might delay the introduction of pediatric praziquantel in the National Essential Medicine list. But now this is sorted. The only thing which we're going to do is to support the meeting of the National Safety and Therapeutic Committee for them to discuss the availability of this drug and recommend it to the minister for further approvals. And about the delivery model for pediatric praziquantel, well, a consensus was reached that this drug will be delivered through mass drug administration. However, it has to be integrated in the already existing programs. The programs focusing on children under the age of 5 and which are actually performing well. So number one, the option which was really selected to be the best is to integrate delivery of pediatric praziquantel with the countrywide deworming program, whereby we know in Tanzania, the coverage for mebendazole or deworming program in Tanzania is above 95%. So if we integrate pediatric praziquantel with the existing program such as that, the likelihood of it performing well is going to be very good, and the coverage is going to be huge. However, we need to do a lot of awareness campaign, a lot of education programs for the communities or the people to understand why we are doing that. And the second option was to introduce it to deliver it through postnatal clinics and the routine clinics. About postnatal, the PNC, the challenge is that in these countries of ours, by the time a child reaches 2 years, most of them, they don't attend clinics. Very few attend the clinics. So we are likely to miss those who are age 2 and above. So we said, okay, I think it will rather be important to also introduce it or deliver it through routine clinics. But this again, this has to be supported by the guidelines. When you deliver it through routine clinics.
Excuse me, Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry for interruption. Could you jump to the conclusion and could you wrap up your presentation in 10 seconds, please?
Okay. Okay, we are already doing community engagement. We are also going to do epidemiological studies. In conclusion, can you go to the last slide? Well, that's about the engagement, but what we want to say, we have now generally addressed the essential medicine list challenge. We have identified the delivery model, and what we need to do is to develop guidelines to support the operations. But we also we are confident with the institutional capacity to facilitate the timely introduction of the drug. However, what we are doing now, and in the upcountry, we are working on the community, addressing community-centered challenges. This has to do with myth, giving them education and raising awareness on the imminent availability of pediatric praziquantel in the next probably 10 or 18 or 20 months. We, as a country now, we still need to work on the burden of schistosomiasis, particularly in the region where data is lacking. And this will support quantification to determine the real need or the quantity of the drug we need to
Okay, thank you, Paul. Paul, I'm sorry, but time is up. So Let's invite Isaac.
Thank you very much, Yoshioka-san, and my apologies to our presenters. I mean, it was very, very interesting, and we would have loved to continue listening, but we also have to give a bit of time to the question Q&A. But we can continue these discussions offline if necessary. So I think the presentation were very interesting. I think at the beginning of the session, I mentioned that it is possible to improve access, but it takes a lot of collaboration. It takes a lot of work, and there is need for engagement, maybe as early as during the R&D phase. And the presentations that we have just had actually showcase that we have access considerations being developed even from the product developer side. We heard from Peter how the consortium and MEC, who are the market authorization holders for the product, are already looking at tech transfer and are already going as far as doing implementation research to look at delivery models. That's actually a very interesting point. And Peter, I'm going to ask you a question about this, so you can think about it while I continue. The question is, why did the consortium or why did MEC decide to go that far? Normally, the delivery models are left to the implementing partners or the countries, but why did the consortium decide to go that far? And then from the country perspective, I at the end of the presentations, I had the feeling that Tanzania were ready for this drug already, which is very actually encouraging, because again, it shows that you don't have to wait for the products to be available and you can start the preparations. The clinical trials have just been completed and the products will probably be available in a couple of years from now. But Tanzania has already started looking at the challenges that they're likely to face, and they already have solutions, on policy, on implementation science, procurement, and even looking at funding options at country level. And they're also aware of the challenges they expect to face. And I was also particularly impressed by the level of multi-stakeholder engagement at Tanzania level, the different ministries. That's actually quite interesting. So one of the questions that I have for Tanzania, if we still have time for the team from Tanzania, you mentioned that on your models of delivery, one of the things that you're considering is on the integration into existing programs. I just wanted you to maybe develop this a little bit further, why you decided to go into the integration model. I know this is what the NTD roadmap is looking for and all these things, but I just wanted to hear from Tanzania's perspective, why you decided to go for this model. But before we go to your answers, there are a couple of questions from the Q&A that I thought we could just mention before we go. First of all, the first one is a clarification from Beatrice Greco, one of the participants who's also from the consortium and also works for MEC. She mentioned that while Tanzania is not part of the ADOPT program that was presented by Peter, it is on the priority list for early adopter countries. So that's actually very good news. It's sort of in line with the country readiness for Tanzania. Another question that I think is worth noting now from the Q&A, we have quite a lot of interesting questions. Let me just quickly scroll through. Some of them have already been answered, but for those who are not reading the Q&A, so one question that was asked, maybe we can start with that one actually. It's a question again from Beatrice to Tanzania. You mentioned that for Tanzania, you already have the drug registered on the country essential medical list. The question is, does the product have to be on the WHO essential medicine list to be registered to be on the same list in Tanzania? So maybe we can start with that question. Thank you. So Paul or Khadija.
Isaac, thank you. Probably let me go ahead. Yes, I think our quickest reference when it comes to medicines, obviously the WHO approval and the compliance issues must be achieved or must be done. So once the WHO has approved the drug, as our colleague from the consortium say, that makes it even easier for our drug regulators, national regulatory authority, to register it. And probably the National Essential Medicine List, we sometimes look at what do we have for the same disease. And remember, the pediatric praziquantel formulation is just a modification, or rather a drug worked out from a parent drug. So the parent drug is already in the list. This is a reformulation of the existing drug. So that's what the chief pharmacist said. No, we don't think we need to. We have to go through the hassle of reviewing a lot of documents to have the pediatric praziquantel formulation included in the National Essential Medicine list, because as it is, the foundation is there.
Okay, thank you. So maybe just one more question to Peter. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but maybe Peter, you can briefly explain to us why the consortium decided to go that step further and get into development of delivery models for this formulation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will try to be short. This is actually the core of why this consortium came together, is to develop an option to make a new treatment possibility available to preschool age children with schistosomiasis. So the consortium did never intend to develop a commercial product, which also means it's not the market will solve the issue of access. So from the very beginning, the consortium was aware that it's not only about developing this new drug, it's also making it available to those in need. And this it's almost an ethical imperative, and it's also I think a responsibility towards the medical community, the patients, the small children, but also to the donors who made the funding available to make sure that this drug reaches children in need as early as possible. The consortium always understood this as part of its mission.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to hand over to my fellow moderator to close the session. We have run out of time, but it's been a very interesting discussion, and I just wanted to commend Tanzania for the preparations. And also, it's really in line with also what the consortium is trying to do. So I think there's linkages there that can be further explored to facilitate the introduction of the new treatment for Tanzania and beyond. Thank you. Yoshoka-san.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. So first of all, let me say I'm very sorry for the inconvenience that we experienced today. There were lots of technical issues today, unfortunately. And it's time to close our webinar session today. And I think that there are 3 presentations involved very, very important topics and issues about access challenges. And we will keep discussing these topics in the following webinars too. But by now, so Peter, Khadija, and Paul, thank you for joining us today. And in our next session, thank you. In our next session in December, we will examine access issues from the WHO perspectives. And there is a program called SPEN that provides support to African countries to distribute NTD drugs. And the details will be uploaded soon on the JAGntd's website. So see you then. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.